In the quiet winter of 1642, as civil war ravaged England and the scientific revolution trembled on the horizon, a frail infant was born prematurely to a widowed mother in Woolsthorpe Manor. So small and fragile was this child that few expected him to survive the night, let alone reshape humanity's understanding of the universe itself. The tiny soul, whose father had died 3 months before his birth, entered a world of uncertainty and chaos, yet would one day bring order to the very cosmos. Such were the humble beginnings of Isaac Newton, whose name would eventually be whispered alongside those of Archimedes, Galileo, and Einstein in the pantheon of scientific immortals. As a boy, young Isaac showed little promise of greatness, struggling in school and concerning himself more with mechanical curiosities than with formal studies. While his mother wished him to become a farmer, the quiet, introspective child constructed water clocks, sundials, and miniature windmills that operated with surprising precision. When sent to market with produce, he would often be discovered beneath a tree, lost in contemplation, or sketching geometric figures in the dirt, the goods untouched. Perhaps it was this tendency toward solitary thought that prepared him for the revelation that would one day change everything. In 1661, Newton entered Trinity College at Cambridge University, washing dishes and tending to wealthier students to pay his way. There, while studying the works of Descartes, Galileo, and Kepler, his mind began to expand beyond the confines of accepted knowledge. Yet it was tragedy, as so often happens in human affairs, that cleared the path for his ascension. When the Great Plague swept through England in 1665, Cambridge closed its doors, sending Newton back to his childhood home for what would become known as his annus mirabilis, miracle year. Imagine him now, a solitary figure of 23, walking the same orchards where he had played as a child, his mind ablaze with questions that had no answers. While death claimed thousands in London, Newton secluded himself in contemplation of life's most fundamental mysteries. It was during this period of isolation that he began to formulate his theories of calculus, optics, and the law of universal gravitation. As autumn leaves fell around him, perhaps including the legendary apple, he wondered not merely why objects fall, but why they fall in straight lines, with predictable acceleration toward Earth's center. The world trembled with questions, and Newton's hands reached out to grasp them. He constructed the first reflecting telescope, proving that white light contained all colors of the spectrum. He developed laws of motion that would remain unchallenged for centuries. And in 1687, he published his masterwork, Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, perhaps the most influential scientific text ever written. Within those pages, Newton described a universe governed not by divine whim but by mathematical precision, where planets traced elliptical paths around the sun, held in perfect balance by invisible forces. The cosmos itself had yielded to his understanding. Yet behind this towering intellect lay a man of contradictions and shadows. The rational scientist who demystified the rainbow spent countless nights as an alchemist, hunched over bubbling crucibles, seeking to transform base metals into gold. The mathematical genius who calculated the motions of celestial bodies wrote more extensively on biblical prophecy and esoteric theology than on physics or mathematics. Newton's brilliance illuminated the universe while casting long shadows across his personal relationships. He never married, formed no family of his own, and engaged in bitter disputes with fellow scientists, particularly with German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz, over who had first invented calculus. As Newton's fame grew, so too did his isolation. The boy who had once been forgotten beneath market trees now commanded the attention of kings and philosophers. In 1696, he left Cambridge to become warden of the Royal Mint in London, where he pursued counterfeiters with the same relentless precision he had once applied to planetary motion. Later, as president of the Royal Society, England's foremost scientific organization, he ruled with an increasingly autocratic hand. The revolutionary, who had once challenged authority, had become authority incarnate. Time, that force he had so elegantly described, eventually claimed Newton as it claims all mortals. In his final years, gout and kidney stones plagued his body, while disputes and controversies troubled his mind. By some accounts, exposure to mercury during his alchemical experiments may have poisoned both his body and temperament. The clear-eyed visionary who had once perceived the mathematical underpinnings of reality grew increasingly erratic, suspicious, and bitter. Even genius, it seems, cannot escape the gravity of human frailty. When death finally came for Newton in 1727, England mourned him as it would a king. His body lay in state in Westminster Abbey, where poets and monarchs find their final rest. Alexander Pope composed his famous epitaph, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." Yet perhaps a truer epitaph lies in Newton's own humble reflection. "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. Tonight, as consciousness ebbs toward the shores of sleep, consider how the same forces that Newton described gravity, motion, and light shape your own journey through time and space. Consider how a single mind, curious and persistent, changed humanity's relationship with the cosmos forever. And as your thoughts grow heavier, surrendering to gravity's gentle pull, remember that we all exist within the mathematical precision of Newton's universe, where every action has its equal and opposite reaction, where light splits into color, where apples fall from trees in perfect, predictable arcs toward a waiting earth. So sleep well, dear dreamer, beneath the same stars that Newton once contemplated, in a universe still unfolding its mysteries, one night at a time. Under the mist-shrouded skies of Elizabethan England, a child was born who would one day hold a mirror to humanity itself. The year was 1564, in the modest market town of Stratford-upon-Avon, where the river meandered through verdant countryside, much as his future words would flow through the consciousness of generations yet unborn. This child, whose quill would later inscribe the very architecture of human emotion onto parchment, took his first breath as the bells of Holy Trinity Church tolled across the rippling waters. Son of a glove maker and municipal official, destiny offered no early hints of the transcendent legacy that would emerge from such ordinary beginnings. This was William Shakespeare, whose name we now whisper with reverence, though in his youth it carried no more weight than the morning dew upon the English countryside. As candles flickered in grammar school windows, young William absorbed classical texts and rhetorical forms, his mind already a fertile ground where ancient wisdom would later bloom into unprecedented creativity. The rhythms of Latin verse and the moral tales of Aesop settled into his consciousness, planting seeds that would, in time, germinate into soliloquies contemplating the very nature of existence. The boy who walked cobblestone streets, listening to the cadence of market vendors and the hushed tones of church services, was unconsciously collecting the raw materials of human expression that would later be transformed through the alchemy of his genius. In those formative years, the textures of everyday life, the weight of grief at his sister's early passing, the vibrance of traveling players who occasionally graced Stratford's inn yards, all these experiences were silently shaping the observer who would one day see through to the essence of human nature. At 18, Shakespeare made a choice that might have altered literary history. He married Anne Hathaway, a woman 8 years his senior, already carrying their first child. Their hasty union produced 3 children in quick succession, Susanna, followed by twins Hamnet and Judith. These domestic responsibilities settled upon the shoulders of a young man whose mind already harbored worlds waiting to be born. And then a curious silence falls across historical record, those mysterious lost years, when Shakespeare vanished from documented existence, only to emerge later in London's bustling theatrical world. Perhaps in this interval of shadow, the transmutation from provincial youth to profound artist was quietly taking place, like a chrysalis suspended between mundane reality and transcendent creation. When the theatrical curtains of London finally parted to reveal Shakespeare's presence, it was not merely as a playwright, but as an actor, shareholder, and increasingly influential literary voice in a city teeming with ambition and artistic rivalry. From the wooden embrace of the theater to the iconic circular walls of the Globe, his company performed beneath open skies, where groundlings stood shoulder to shoulder while nobles gazed down from galleries. It was here that words never before uttered in the English tongue found their first voice. Multitudinous seas incarnadine, the milk of human kindness, to thine own self be true, phrases that would eventually become so deeply integrated into our language that many would forget their source. Each play that flowed from his pen seemed to expand the very capacity of language itself, as if Shakespeare were not merely using words but reinventing them, bending them to capture previously inexpressible truths. The height of his powers arrived as the 16th century gave way to the 17th, when the tragedies emerged like dark stars in the firmament of literature. Hamlet, tormented Prince of Denmark, asked the fundamental question that echoes through human consciousness: to be or not to be. King Lear raged against the storm, stripping away pretense until nothing remained but raw, howling humanity. Macbeth, consumed by ambition, watched as his hands became irrevocably stained with blood that no ocean could cleanse. Othello, magnificently undone by the poison of jealousy, destroyed the very love he treasured above all else. In these monumental works, Shakespeare seemed to stand at the very precipice of human experience, gazing unflinchingly into abysses that most dare not acknowledge, somehow returning with language that made the unbearable not only bearable but profoundly beautiful. Yet for all this profound insight, the man himself remained curiously absent from the historical record. While contemporaries like Ben Jonson loudly proclaimed their literary significance, Shakespeare moved like a ghost through his own narrative, leaving us precious few letters, no journals, no confessional diaries to illuminate the inner workings of perhaps the greatest mind in literary history. This absence has spawned centuries of speculation and conspiracy theories. Was the glovemaker's son truly capable of such universal genius, or did some educated nobleman pen these immortal works behind a convenient mask? Yet the plays themselves offer the most compelling evidence of their creator, not a nobleman isolated in privilege, but an observer who knew intimately both palace intrigues and tavern brawls, who could render with equal conviction the thoughts of kings and gravediggers. Shakespeare's later years witnessed a shift toward redemptive narratives in plays like The Tempest, where Prospero, often viewed as the playwright's alter ego, ultimately relinquishes his magical powers. Perhaps this reflected Shakespeare's own journey, as he gradually withdrew from London's theatrical world to return to Stratford, acquiring property and settling into the role of respected gentleman. The fire that destroyed the Globe Theatre in 1613 during a performance of Henry VIII seemed almost symbolic, as if the physical manifestation of his creative universe had fulfilled its purpose, leaving only the indestructible legacy of words behind. By 1616, at the relatively young age of 52, Shakespeare composed his will, famously bequeathing his second-best bed to his wife Anne, a detail that has provoked endless speculation about their relationship. On April 23, 1616, the quill finally fell silent. The man who had given voice to the full spectrum of human experience, from ethereal love to darkest hatred, from transcendent wisdom to devastating folly, was laid to rest beneath the chancel floor of Holy Trinity Church, the same sacred space where he had been baptized 5 decades earlier. His gravestone bears an inscription that seems both a blessing and a curse. "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." Even in death, his words retained power. This simple verse has indeed protected his remains from disturbance for over 4 centuries. What remains most remarkable about Shakespeare's mind is not merely its creative fertility, over 37 plays and 154 sonnets attributed to his name, but its seemingly infinite capacity to contain multitudes. How could one consciousness encompass the jealous rage of Othello, the existential doubt of Hamlet, the fairy mischief of Puck, the cold calculation of Lady Macbeth, the innocent wonder of Miranda? Perhaps no other human has ever demonstrated such profound empathy, such ability to inhabit completely contradictory perspectives with equal conviction and authenticity. In this lies Shakespeare's greatest genius, not simply as a wordsmith or storyteller, but as one who seemed to possess a passport to every corner of the human condition. As stars now wheel above the sleeping town of Stratford-upon-Avon, much as they did when a glovemaker's son first cried beneath their distant light, we might wonder at the mysterious alchemy that produces such a mind among millions. Was it education, opportunity, innate talent, or some unrepeatable convergence of all these elements? Perhaps we find comfort in the impossibility of this question, in accepting that some phenomena remain beyond complete understanding. The miracle of Shakespeare's mind continues to unfold with each new generation that discovers his works, finding within those 4-century-old lines reflections of their own joys and sorrows, their own questions about what it means to be human. So sleep well, dear dreamer, knowing that even as consciousness fades, somewhere in the world tonight, Hamlet still contemplates mortality, Romeo still calls to Juliet, and the strange music of Shakespeare's unparalleled imagination plays on, immortal and ever-renewing, like the eternal rhythm of your own gentle breathing as you drift toward dreams. In the gentle spring of 1879, as the Industrial Revolution transformed Europe and the electric light bulb was mere months from illuminating human nights, a child was born to a modest Jewish family in the German city of Ulm. The infant arrived with a curiously shaped head, causing momentary concern among the attending family, before revealing himself to be otherwise healthy and unremarkable. No cosmic sign, no celestial alignment heralded the arrival of one who would later unravel the very fabric of time and space. No one could have foreseen that this quiet child would one day redefine humanity's understanding of the universe itself. Such were the simple beginnings of Albert Einstein, whose name would eventually symbolize genius in all its profound manifestation. As a boy, young Albert displayed none of the prodigious talents one might expect of a future revolutionary thinker. He spoke little until the age of 3, causing his parents to fear developmental delays. In school, he was neither the brightest student nor the most attentive, often described by teachers as distracted and dreamy. Yet beneath this unremarkable exterior churned a mind of unusual depth, captivated not by rote learning, but by the mysteries of the compass his father had given him, the invisible forces that move the needle regardless of the instrument's position. While other children played with toys, young Albert contemplated the unseen architecture of reality. At 16, Einstein imagined himself riding alongside a beam of light, wondering what such light would look like if one could travel at its speed. This seemingly childlike thought experiment would haunt him for a decade, eventually blooming into the theory that would transform physics forever. But the path to revelation was neither straight nor smooth. Rejected from university teaching positions and unable to secure academic employment after graduation, Einstein took a humble job as a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, a position that many would have considered beneath someone with his education. Yet it was here, in the quiet hours between examining patent applications, that his mind wandered freely through the cosmos. The year 1905 dawned with little fanfare, yet would conclude as Einstein's annus mirabilis miracle year. In a burst of creativity rarely matched in scientific history, the 26-year-old patent clerk published 4 papers that would eventually reconfigure our understanding of matter, energy, light, and time. He explained the photoelectric effect, proving light existed as discrete particles as well as waves. He provided mathematical proof for the existence of atoms through his analysis of Brownian motion. He formulated the special theory of relativity, revealing that time and space were not absolute, but relative to the observer's motion. And finally, he derived the equation that would become synonymous with his name, E·mc², demonstrating the equivalence of mass and energy. The universe, once thought immutable and mechanical, revealed itself to be fluid, relative, and far stranger than anyone had imagined. As Einstein's theories gradually gained acceptance, his reputation ascended from obscure patent clerk to international scientific celebrity. Universities that had once rejected his applications now competed for his presence. In 1915, he published his general theory of relativity, expanding his revolutionary framework to include gravity not as a force, but as a curvature in the fabric of space-time itself. When observations during a solar eclipse in 1919 confirmed his predictions about the bending of starlight around the sun, newspaper headlines around the world proclaimed the arrival of a new Copernicus, a new Newton. The quiet dreamer had reshaped our cosmic understanding, and the world would never view the stars the same way again. Yet, as Einstein's scientific star rose, darkness was gathering across Europe. The rise of Nazi Germany in the early 1930s made his position as a Jewish intellectual increasingly precarious. While lecturing in America in 1933, he learned that the new regime had seized his property and savings. He would never return to the country of his birth. Instead, Einstein accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, becoming an American citizen in 1940. The man who had reimagined time found himself a refugee from history's darkest hour. As war engulfed the world, Einstein's pacifist principles collided with grim reality. Fearing that Nazi Germany might develop atomic weapons, he signed a letter to President Roosevelt, urging American research into nuclear reactions, inadvertently helping to initiate the Manhattan Project. When atomic bombs later devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein was haunted by his indirect role, lamenting, "Had I known that the Germans would not succeed in developing an atomic bomb, I would have done nothing." The theoretical equation that had once existed purely in the realm of ideas, EMC chord, had unleashed devastating power upon the world. The visionary who had illuminated the cosmos now witnessed his discoveries cast shadows he had never intended. In his later years, Einstein's hair grew wild and white, his figure becoming the very image of the archetypal genius in the public imagination. He continued his search for a unified field theory that would elegantly connect all forces of nature, a quest that would remain unfulfilled. The man who had once rewritten the rules of the universe found himself increasingly at odds with the emerging field of quantum mechanics, uncomfortable with its implications of uncertainty and probability. God does not play dice with the universe, he famously objected, even as younger physicists moved quantum theory forward without him. The revolutionary had become, in some ways, a traditionalist. On April 18, 1955, Einstein's remarkable journey through space and time came to its natural conclusion. He died quietly in Princeton Hospital, refusing surgery for an aortic aneurysm with the words, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially." According to his wishes, his body was cremated the same day, his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location, a final act of privacy from a man whose thoughts had become so public. Yet before cremation, without family's permission, the pathologist removed and preserved Einstein's brain, hoping that future science might discover the anatomical source of such extraordinary insight. Even in death, his mind remained an object of profound curiosity. Tonight, as consciousness slowly dissolves into dreams, consider Einstein's vision of a universe where time bends like a river, where mass and energy are but different expressions of the same cosmic essence. Consider how a single mind, curious and persistent, changed humanity's perspective on reality itself. And as your thoughts grow heavier, surrendering to sleep's gentle gravity, remember that we all travel through Einstein's space-time, where past, present, and future exist simultaneously in an elegant continuum. Perhaps somewhere in this vast universe, light from Earth carrying images of Einstein himself still travels outward, a testament to a curious patent clerk who dared to reimagine the cosmos. So sleep well, dear dreamer, as you float through curved space-time, in a universe still unfolding its mysteries, one night at a time. In the golden age of Athens, as marble columns rose against azure skies and the cradle of Western thought took form, a singular man walked the agora with bare feet and questioning eyes. The year was 469, before Christ, when into a sculptor's family was born a child who would chisel not stone, but thought itself, carving away at falsehoods until only truth remained. His name, withheld from our story for a moment longer, would echo through millennia as the voice of wisdom, the gadfly of Athens, the midwife to ideas. A humble stoneworker's son whose questions would outlive empires. As a young man, he abandoned his father's craft, drawn instead to the marketplace of ideas, where citizens gathered in the shadow of the Acropolis. Unlike the sophists who sold their wisdom for coin, this man sought truth without price, wearing the same threadbare cloak in summer and winter alike, his weathered face turned upward in contemplation. Socrates, for that was his name, believed knowledge was not a possession to be traded, but a pursuit to be shared. "I know that I know nothing," he would say, a paradox that formed the foundation of his wisdom. The Athens of Socrates flourished in the aftermath of victory against Persian invaders, a city-state swelling with pride and intellectual ferment. While others built monuments of stone and wrote histories of conquest, Socrates constructed dialogues, conversations that probed the very nature of virtue, justice, and knowledge. He claimed a divine sign, a daimonion, guided him away from error, a small voice that never commanded but only cautioned. How strange that a man remembered for his reason should be guided by something so mystical, so beyond rational thought. In the streets and gymnasiums, surrounded by young men of privilege, Socrates developed his method, the elenchousa form of cooperative dialogue that peeled away pretense. "The unexamined life is not worth living," he would tell his followers, among them the bright-eyed Plato, who would preserve his master's words when Socrates himself refused to write them down. For Socrates believed wisdom lived in conversation, in the space between souls, not trapped in silent scrolls. As Athenian democracy reached its zenith, Socrates served as a hoplite soldier, fighting bravely in the Peloponnesian War, surprising those who knew only the philosopher and not the man. He stood his ground at Potidaea and Delium when others fled, his physical courage matching his intellectual fearlessness. Yet, even as he fulfilled his duty to Athens, he questioned its foundations, asking what justice truly meant in a society ruled by the many. The tides of fortune turned against Athens as the long war with Sparta drained its strength and spirit. In this climate of defeat and recrimination, Socrates' questions no longer seemed the benign inquiries of a harmless eccentric. His association with men who had betrayed democracy, particularly his former student Alcibiades, cast suspicion upon the aging philosopher. The gadfly had stung too many horses, and now the herd grew restless. In 399 before Christ, at 70 years of age, Socrates faced his accusers in the Athenian court, charged with impiety and corrupting the youth. 500 citizens would judge him, men whose certainties he had questioned, whose assumptions he had challenged. Standing before them, he refused to flatter or beg for mercy, speaking instead with the same directness that had defined his life. "The unexamined life is not worth living," he repeated, knowing his words might seal his fate. By a narrow margin, the jury found him guilty. When asked to propose his own punishment, Socrates suggested with what some call arrogance and others integrity that he be given free meals at the Prytaneum, an honor reserved for heroes and Olympic victors. The jury, insulted by his response, sentenced him to death by hemlock. His friends arranged an escape, but Socrates refused. To flee would be to deny the laws he had lived under, to contradict his teachings with his actions. In his final hours, surrounded by grieving disciples, Socrates displayed neither fear nor regret. He discoursed on the immortality of the soul, comforting those who wept for him. When the jailer brought the cup of poison, Socrates took it with steady hands, drinking as if at a symposium rather than an execution. His last words, according to Plato, were a reminder to offer a sacrifice to Asclepius, the god of healing a debt paid as his mortal illness ended in death. So died the man who taught us to question, to seek wisdom rather than wealth, to know ourselves before presuming to know the world. In the centuries that followed, his method would inspire countless minds, from Aristotle to Kant, from Renaissance humanists to modern philosophers. The questions he posed: what is justice? How should we live? What can we truly know? Remain as vital and vexing as they were beneath the Athenian sun 2 millennia ago. As the night deepens around you, consider this paradox: that a man who claimed to know nothing became the foundation of Western thought. That a teacher who wrote not a single word has been quoted for thousands of years. That in accepting death, rather than compromising his principles, Socrates achieved a kind of immortality. Perhaps wisdom, like sleep, comes not in the anxious grasping for certainty, but in the gentle surrender to wonder. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your thoughts, like those of Socrates, wander freely through the agora of your dreams. Across the rolling landscapes of 19th century England, as the Industrial Revolution transformed humanity's relationship with the natural world, a gentle-natured boy wandered through gardens and woodlands, collecting beetles and observing the intricate patterns of life that would one day lead him to reimagine our understanding of existence itself. The year was 1809, when into a wealthy and intellectual family was born a child who would challenge mankind's most cherished assumptions about our place in the cosmic order. His grandfather had already speculated about the mutability of species, planting seeds of revolutionary thought that would one day flower in the mind of his descendant. A naturalist whose name, momentarily withheld, would eventually become inseparable from the very concept of evolution. The young man's early education gave little hint of his future greatness indeed. His father once scolded him, saying, "You care for nothing but shooting, dogs, and rat-catching, and you will be a disgrace to yourself and all your family." Charles Darwin, for that was his name, seemed destined for an unremarkable life, perhaps as a country parson after his abandoned medical studies left him adrift. Yet fate intervened in the form of an invitation to join the HMS Beagle as the ship's naturalist, a 5-year voyage around the world that would transform not only the directionless young man but eventually humankind's understanding of its origins. How strange that history often turns on such small hinges, such chance occurrences. The Beagle departed England on December 27, 1831, carrying the 22-year-old Darwin toward horizons both geographical and intellectual. As the ship navigated the coastlines of South America, Darwin filled notebooks with observations of geological formations, collected unknown species of plants and animals, and unearthed fossils of creatures long extinct. On the Galapagos Islands, he noticed variations among finches from different islands, subtle differences in beak size and shape that correlated with their particular food sources. These observations, seemingly insignificant at the time, would later crystallize into a theory so profound that it would divide the scientific world and challenge humanity's conception of its divine origin. Upon returning to England in 1836, Darwin quietly began assembling the evidence for what he called transmutation, the idea that species were not immutable creations, but evolved gradually through a process of adaptation to their environments. He married his cousin Emma Wedgwood, who supported his work despite her religious concerns about its implications, and settled at Down House in Kent, where ill health possibly contracted during his voyages confined him largely to home. There, through painstaking experiments with pigeons and barnacles, through correspondence with naturalists worldwide, and through relentless examination of implications, Darwin refined the mechanism by which evolution occurred. Natural selection, the principle that individuals with advantageous traits survive to reproduce, passing those traits to offspring. Yet he hesitated to publish, aware of how his conclusions would challenge the religious orthodoxy of Victorian England. The turning point came in June 1858, when Darwin received a manuscript from Alfred Russel Wallace, a naturalist working in the Malay archipelago, outlining a theory remarkably similar to Darwin's own. This unexpected parallel discovery spurred Darwin to complete his magnum opus, and on November 24, 1859, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection was published. Its first printing of 250 copies, selling out in a single day. The book, deliberately avoiding discussion of human evolution and written in accessible language for the general reader, nevertheless unleashed a storm of controversy that would forever alter the intellectual landscape of Western civilization. Thomas Huxley, Darwin's most vigorous defender, reportedly exclaimed upon reading it, "How extremely stupid not to have thought of that." The ensuing debate thrust the reclusive Darwin reluctantly into the public eye, as his theory became a lightning rod for both scientific and theological controversy. While scientific contemporaries increasingly accepted the overwhelming evidence for evolution, religious authorities condemned what they perceived as an attack on divine creation. The most famous confrontation occurred in 1860 at the Oxford University Museum, where Thomas Huxley, nicknamed Darwin's Bulldog, defended evolution against Bishop Samuel Wilberforce in a heated exchange that symbolized the broader cultural conflict between science and traditional belief. Through it all, Darwin himself remained largely secluded at Down House, continuing his research, corresponding with supporters and critics alike, but avoiding public confrontation. In 1871, Darwin published The Descent of Man, finally addressing the implications of natural selection for human origins that Homo sapiens, too, had evolved from earlier primates through the same mechanisms that shaped all life. This explicit challenge to human exceptionalism intensified opposition to Darwin's ideas, particularly among those who saw in human consciousness and moral reasoning evidence of divine creation. Yet Darwin gently insisted that even our highest faculties, reason, conscience, the capacity for art and spirituality, could be understood as products of natural selection, differing from animal cognition in degree rather than kind. How humbling and yet how awe-inspiring to see humanity not as separately created but as part of nature's grand continuum. As Darwin entered his final years, his health continued to deteriorate, though the exact nature of his chronic illness remains debated by medical historians. His last major work focused not on grand theories but on earthworms, humble creatures whose cumulative actions, he demonstrated, reshaped the very surface of the planet over time. This study embodied Darwin's lifetime approach to science: careful observation, experimental verification, and recognition that profound change can result from small actions multiplied across vast timescales. A fitting final chapter for the man who had revealed how the immense diversity of life arose through incremental adaptations across geological ages. On April 19, 1882, Charles Darwin died at age 73. His revolutionary work fundamentally altering how humanity understood its place in the natural world. Despite controversial religious implications of his work, he received the honor of burial in Westminster Abbey near Sir Isaac Newton scientific establishment's acknowledgement of his towering intellectual achievement. His coffin was carried by distinguished scientists and members of Parliament, a public recognition that, whatever theological challenges his work presented, Darwin had forever changed the course of human understanding. The quiet collector of beetles had become one of history's most transformative thinkers. As you drift toward slumber, consider how Darwin's patient observations revealed the intricate connections binding all living things within a single family tree, that the creatures stirring in the night outside your window, the plants breathing silently in the darkness, even the microscopic organisms within your own body, all share with you a common ancestor in the distant past. Perhaps there is comfort in this profound kinship, this scientific revelation that we are not separate from nature but interwoven within its fabric, products of the same beautiful and indifferent processes that shaped all life on Earth. Darwin's legacy reminds us that understanding does not diminish wonder. Indeed, knowing the mechanisms behind life's diversity makes its majesty all the more astonishing. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your consciousness, that marvelous product of evolution's long journey, find peaceful rest in the knowledge of your connection to all that lives and breathes upon this ancient earth. In the humble dwelling of a court musician in Bonn, Germany, as winter yielded to spring in the year 1770, a child entered the world who would one day transform sound itself into the language of the human soul. Born into modest circumstances but destined for immortality, this boy would rise from harsh beginnings to reshape what mankind believed possible in the realm of music. His compositions would survive empires, outlast revolutions, and speak to generations yet unborn. A maestro whose name, for now withheld, would become synonymous with the very concept of musical genius. The young boy's childhood unfolded not in tender nurturing but in the shadow of ambition. His father, Johann, a mediocre tenor in the electoral court and an alcoholic, recognized his son's precocious talent and envisioned creating a prodigy in the mold of young Mozart. Ludwig van Beethoven, for that was the boy's name, found himself standing on a bench to reach the keys, tiny fingers stretched across ivory as his father demanded perfection, sometimes waking the child in the middle of the night for punishing practice sessions. Tears falling silently on the keyboard, the boy played on, his father's strict hand leaving marks on his spirit as surely as on his body. By age 7, Ludwig performed his first public concert, his father advertising him as 6 years old to enhance the sense of wonder at his abilities. The child's genius was undeniable, but unlike Mozart before him, Ludwig's temperament bore no natural cheerfulness. Instead, a profound seriousness settled upon him early, as if he sensed the turbulent path that lay ahead. His mother, one of the few gentle presences in his life, died when he was just 17, leaving him to care for younger siblings while his father descended further into alcoholism. Yet from these depths of early sorrow came a determination that would fuel a lifetime of creation. Vienna beckoned the young musician, the musical capital of Europe, where Mozart had dazzled and Haydn reigned supreme. At 22, Ludwig arrived in that grand city, his pockets near empty but his mind overflowing with melodies yet to be born. He studied briefly with Mozart, then more extensively with Haydn. Though his fierce independence made him a difficult student, would not be contained by convention, even when taught by masters. The aristocratic salons of Vienna opened their doors to this rough-mannered young man, for his brilliance at the keyboard was already unmatched, his improvisations leaving listeners in speechless wonder. As the 18th century yielded to the 19th, Beethoven's star rose in the firmament of European music. His first symphony, performed in 1800, marked him as heir to the classical tradition, yet already hinted at the revolutionary voice emerging within him. He moved among princes and counts, yet refused to bow to their pretensions, once tellingly remarking that while there were many princes, there was only one Beethoven. In this era of political upheaval, As Napoleon's armies redrew the map of Europe, Beethoven's music captured the spirit of human dignity and freedom that transcended borders and spoke to universal truths. Then fate, that concept which would inspire one of his greatest musical motifs, struck a cruel blow. Around 1798, Beethoven began to notice a buzzing in his ears, a high-pitched ringing that disturbed his concentration. By 1801, he confessed in a letter to a friend his growing terror. He was losing his hearing, that most precious sense for a musician. "How humiliated I have felt," he wrote, "if somebody standing beside me heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing." The cruelty of this affliction cannot be overstated, the conductor of symphonies growing increasingly unable to hear the very orchestras he commanded. In the autumn of 1802, Beethoven retreated to Heiligenstadt, a village outside Vienna. There, in deep despair, he penned what would become known as the Heiligenstadt Testamente letter to his brothers, that was also a cry into the void, a confession of suicidal thoughts, and ultimately, a decision to live. "I would have ended my life," he wrote. "It was only my art that held me back." From this nadir of human suffering came a resolve that would produce the most heroic period of his creative life. The composer who could not hear would write music more profound than any who could. The middle period of Beethoven's career birthed masterpieces that broke every convention. The revolutionary Third Symphony, nicknamed Eroica, originally dedicated to Napoleon until Beethoven, enraged when Bonaparte crowned himself emperor, violently scratched out the dedication. The Fifth Symphony with its famous Fate Knocking at the Door opening, the Pastoral Sixth, the transcendent Emperor Concerto. All while social isolation increased with his deafness, forcing him to communicate through conversation books where visitors wrote their words for his eyes, since his ears could no longer serve. His temper grew legendary, his appearance disheveled, his manner often brusque, yet the nobility of Vienna continued to revere the difficult genius in their midst. By 1814, Beethoven was completely deaf. At the premiere of his Ninth Symphony, in 1824, he stood before the orchestra as nominal conductor, another keeping actual time. Unable to hear the thunderous applause, when it concluded, a young musician had to turn him around to see the audience's rapturous response. This final symphony, with its revolutionary inclusion of a chorus singing Schiller's Ode to Joy, represented a vision of universal brotherhood that sprang from a man who could no longer experience the very art form he had transformed. What cosmic irony that the creator of such sounds dwelled in perfect silence. The final years brought physical suffering beyond deafness, chronic abdominal pain, liver disease exacerbated by his fondness for wine, and the emotional torment of a failed attempt to gain custody of his nephew Karl after his brother's death. On March 26, 1827, as a thunderstorm raged outside his Vienna apartment, Ludwig van Beethoven died at age 56. Legend claims that, as death approached, he raised his fist in defiance one last time, the final act of a man who had spent his life wresting beauty from the jaws of suffering. An estimated 20 people lined the streets for his funeral procession, honoring the man who had given voice to the inexpressible depths of human experience. As you drift toward slumber, consider the paradox of Beethoven's existence, that from silence came sound, from isolation came connection, from suffering came joy. His music endures not merely as beautiful arrangement of notes, but as testimony to the resilience of the human spirit when confronted with life's cruelest ironies. Perhaps there is comfort in knowing that our greatest limitations might become, with courage and persistence, the source of our most profound contributions to this world. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may Beethoven's eternal melodies accompany you into that most personal symphony music of your dreams. Beneath African skies, where the vast landscapes of South Africa stretch toward distant horizons, a contemplative child gazed upward at the stars and wondered what might lie beyond the boundaries of Earth. The year was 1971, when into a world still dreaming of space exploration was born a boy whose imaginative visions would one day reshape industries and push the boundaries of what humanity thought possible. Fascinated by science fiction and technology from his earliest years, this solitary youth found refuge in books and computers, his mind constantly reaching toward futures others could barely imagine. A visionary whose name, momentarily withheld, would become synonymous with the audacious reimagining of humanity's relationship with technology, energy, and the cosmos itself. The young man's childhood unfolded in the complex social landscape of apartheid-era South Africa, where he often felt isolated, a brilliant but bullied child whose mind worked differently than his peers. Elon Musk, for that was his name, found escape in programming, creating his first video game at age 12 and selling it for $500 to glimpse of the entrepreneurial spirit that would later drive him to transform multiple industries. At 17, seeking broader horizons and understanding instinctively that North America would offer greater opportunities for his technological ambitions, he left his homeland for Canada, carrying little besides his dreams and determination. How many great journeys begin with such departure, leaving behind of the familiar in pursuit of something glimpsed only in imagination. After studying at Queen's University in Ontario, Musk transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, earning degrees in both physics and economics, a combination that reflected his rare ability to understand both scientific principles and market forces. Accepted to a PhD program at Stanford, he arrived in California just as the Internet revolution was beginning to transform society, and after only 2 days, he left academia behind, drawn irresistibly to the entrepreneurial possibilities of this emerging digital frontier. His first company, Zip2, provided online city guides to newspapers, a modest beginning that nevertheless revealed his instinct for identifying needs in emerging markets. When Compaq purchased the company in 1999, the once penniless immigrant who had once slept on office floors and showered at a local YMCA received $22 million seed capital for far more ambitious ventures. With his newfound wealth, Musk turned his attention to the financial industry, co-founding an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. When eBay acquired PayPal in 2002, Musk's share amounted to $180 million, a fortune that most would have used to retire in luxury, but that he viewed merely as fuel for his greater ambitions. Rather than resting in comfortable wealth, he invested nearly everything into 2 startlingly ambitious ventures. SpaceX, founded with the seemingly impossible goal of making space travel affordable enough to eventually colonize Mars, and Tesla, which aimed to accelerate humanity's transition to sustainable energy through electric vehicles. Both companies appeared to many observers as romantic follies, doomed ventures of an idealist who failed to understand the practical limitations of established industries. The years that followed tested Musk's resolve as both companies repeatedly faced the precipice of failure. SpaceX saw its first 3 rocket launches end in explosion, each failure consuming precious capital and credibility. Tesla struggled with production delays, quality issues, and skepticism from automotive industry veterans who insisted that electric vehicles would remain niche products. By 2008, as global financial markets collapsed, Musk faced a profound personal crisis. Companies were rapidly burning through remaining funds. His first marriage had dissolved, and he was forced to borrow money for basic living expenses despite his paper wealth. Then came a moment that has since entered entrepreneurial legend in December 2008, with SpaceX down to its last launch attempt and Tesla hours from bankruptcy. Two miraculous reprieves arrived nearly simultaneously. SpaceX's Falcon 1 rocket successfully reached orbit, securing a $1.6 billion NASA contract, while Tesla received 11th-hour financing to continue operation. From the edge of complete failure, Musk's ventures began their improbable ascent. Tesla would eventually transform the automotive industry by proving electric vehicles could be desirable and practical, while SpaceX would achieve what many thought impossible by developing reusable rockets that dramatically reduced the cost of reaching orbit. These triumphs, born from near catastrophe, revealed a central quality of Musk's approach: a willingness to endure extraordinary risk and pressure in pursuit of transformative goals. As his companies achieved increasing success, Musk's public persona evolved in complex ways, celebrated as a real-life Iron Man by admirers, criticized for erratic behavior and controversial statements by detractors. His acquisition of Twitter, later renamed X, in 2022 pulled him further into political and cultural debates, adding new dimensions to his already complicated public image. Yet behind the headlines and social media storms, his companies continued their technological advances. Tesla, expanding into energy storage and solar power. SpaceX developing its massive Starship rocket intended one day to carry humans to Mars. Neuralink pursuing brain-computer interfaces, and The Boring Company reimagining underground transportation. Each venture connected by threads of common vision: sustainable energy, multiplanetary existence, and the integration of humanity with advanced technology. Unlike historical figures whose stories are complete, Musk's narrative continues to unfold, making definitive assessment impossible. His critics point to management controversies, production delays, and problematic public statements as evidence of fundamental flaws in his approach. His supporters counter that transformation at the scale he attempts necessarily involves stumbles along the way, that the sheer difficulty of simultaneously revolutionizing space travel, automobile manufacturing, and energy systems demands a tolerance for imperfection. What cannot be disputed is the scale of his ambition and his willingness to stake everything on visions that extend far beyond quarterly profits to the very future of human civilization. What ultimately separates Musk from many contemporaries is this unusual time horizon perspective that regularly contemplates humanity's existence, not just decades, but centuries into the future. His preoccupation with existential risks to human civilization, artificial intelligence, climate change, asteroid impacts, the vulnerability of a single planet species reflects a mind that dwells not merely on next quarter's results, but on humanity's long-term survival. Whether one views his proposed solutions as visionary or misguided, the scope of his concerns stretches beyond conventional business thinking to encompass the broadest questions of human destiny. In this sense, perhaps he represents a modern archetype, the entrepreneur-philosopher, applying commercial means towards civilizational ends. As night deepens around you, consider how the story of Elon Musk, still being written, reflects ancient patterns of human, striving to reach for the seemingly impossible, the willingness to fail repeatedly in pursuit of transformation, the tension between vision and practical constraint. Perhaps what draws us to such figures is not their perfection but their embodiment of our own conflicted nature, capable of both remarkable achievement and troubling misstep, of both generosity and hubris, of both world-changing innovation and human frailty. In an age of unprecedented technological change, when humanity stands at crossroads of energy, automation, and space exploration, such complex figures remind us that progress has never followed a straight or simple path. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your own aspirations, whether modest or magnificent, find expression in the quiet wisdom of your dreams. In the midnight hours of a thunderstorm that shook the Balkan mountains, as lightning split the darkness over a small village in what is now Croatia, a child was born who would one day harness that very power of electricity that announced his arrival. The year was 1856, when into a Serbian Orthodox family came a slender boy whose visions would illuminate the world and whose name would someday be synonymous with innovation itself. His father, a priest who had hoped his son would follow in his ecclesiastical footsteps, could not have imagined that this child would instead become a high priest of science, communing not with the divine but with the fundamental forces of nature. A visionary whose identity, momentarily withheld, would one day be measured in magnetic fields and memorialized in coils of copper. The young man displayed remarkable abilities from an early age, blessed with an eidetic memory and plagued by strange visions that some might call hallucinations, but which he experienced as waking dreams of extraordinary clarity. Nikola Tesla, for that was his name, could visualize complex machinery in complete and perfect detail, assembling and disassembling inventions in his mind before a single physical component was crafted. His education took him from the Austrian Empire to Prague and eventually to Budapest, where, while walking in a park reciting poetry, he was struck with the solution to a problem that had long vexed electrical engineers: the rotating magnetic field, the key to alternating current. He would later describe drawing the diagram of his induction motor in the dirt with a stick, a moment of clarity that would change civilization itself. By 1884, Tesla arrived in America with little more than recommendations and the designs flourishing in his remarkable mind. He came to work for Thomas Edison, the celebrated inventor whose direct current systems were then illuminating parts of American cities. The relationship between the methodical Edison and the visionary Tesla quickly soured two titans of electricity whose approaches to invention could not have been more different. Where Edison relied on trial and error, Tesla worked from mental models of stunning precision. Where Edison was a pragmatic businessman, Tesla was a poet of electrical theory who cared little for commercial considerations. After departing Edison's employ, following a dispute over payment that would set the tone for Tesla's lifelong financial struggles, the Serbian inventor found funding for his own laboratory. There, he developed the alternating current induction motor and the polyphase system for transmitting electrical power inventions that would prove far superior to Edison's direct current for transmitting electricity over long distances. This technological divergence erupted into what history now calls the War of the Currents, a battle not merely of engineering principles but of reputations, with Edison stooping to electrocute animals publicly to demonstrate the supposed dangers of Tesla's alternating current. Through this unseemly spectacle, Tesla maintained a dignified silence, letting his technology speak for itself. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago marked Tesla's vindication when Westinghouse, using Tesla's AC system, won the contract to illuminate the fair, creating a white city of electric light that dazzled millions of visitors. Soon after, Tesla and Westinghouse harnessed the power of Niagara Falls with the world's first major hydroelectric plant, fulfilling Tesla's childhood dream of someday capturing the power of that natural wonder. At this apex of his career, Tesla was celebrated in both scientific circles and society salons, dining with the likes of Mark Twain and Stanford White, his tall, elegant figure cutting a distinguished presence despite his increasingly eccentric behaviors. With fame came the freedom to pursue his most ambitious visions. In his laboratory in Colorado Springs, Tesla conducted experiments with electrical resonance and wireless power transmission, creating artificial lightning of millions of volts that caused thunder heard 25 miles away and exploded the generator of the local power company. He claimed to have detected signals from other planets and developed plans for a world wireless system that would transmit not only messages but electrical power freely through the Earth itself. These experiments led to his grandest project, Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, intended as the first broadcast system for wireless communication and energy transmission across the Atlantic. But here, the arc of Tesla's career began its poignant descent. His financial backer, J.P. Morgan, withdrew funding when he realized Tesla envisioned not merely wireless communication, which might be profitable, but wireless energy transmission, which would be philanthropic but not lucrative. "Where do we put the meter?" Morgan reportedly asked, exposing the fundamental conflict between Tesla's vision of freely available energy and the capitalist imperative to commodify and sell. Without funding, Wardenclyffe was abandoned, its tower eventually torn down for scrap, perhaps the greatest of Tesla's unrealized dreams. The subsequent decades saw Tesla's gradual retreat from public prominence into an increasingly isolated existence. Living in a series of New York hotels, accumulating unpaid bills, he continued to announce occasional inventions and theories, some practical, others so fantastical that the scientific establishment dismissed them as the ravings of a man who had strayed from rational inquiry. He spoke of death rays capable of destroying enemy aircraft, of photographing thoughts, of communicating with other planets. Meanwhile, his earlier patents expired or were attributed to others. His role in creating the modern electrical world gradually obscured in popular memory. In his final years, Tesla developed an intense attachment to pigeons, claiming one white female pigeon was the love of his life, an otherworldly connection that perhaps compensated for the human relationships his single-minded devotion to science had never allowed him to form. On January 7, 1943, a maid at the Hotel New Yorker found the 86-year-old inventor dead in his room, his astonishing mind finally at rest. The U.S. government immediately seized his papers, concerned that among his thousands of notes might be technology too dangerous for the world at war. Thus passed the man who had, in the words of one biographer, invented the 20th century. As you drift toward the borderlands of consciousness, where Tesla himself often lingered between waking and dreaming, consider how this singular genius perceived patterns invisible to ordinary minds, heard the music in mathematical equations, and saw the luminous potential of forces that others could not imagine. Perhaps in our own dreams, we occasionally glimpse what Tesla saw daily, the hidden architectures that underlie our reality, the pulsing currents that connect all things. In a world now ablaze with the light he helped create, his greatest legacy may be not any single invention, but the embodiment of human imagination, unfettered by convention. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may Tesla's visionary spirit inspire your own midnight illuminations in the gentle landscape of your dreams. in the verdant hills of northern Greece, as olive trees swayed in Mediterranean breezes and the Aegean lapped at distant shores, a child was born who would one day categorize all known forms of knowledge and whose influence would shape human thought for over 2 millennia. The year was 384 before Christ, in the small town of Stagira, a place that would later pride itself on being the birthplace of a mind so vast that it encompassed medicine and metaphysics, politics and poetry, ethics and astronomy. Born to a physician who served the Macedonian royal family, this boy would inherit his father's empirical eye, that careful attention to the physical world that would later distinguish his philosophy from the more abstract musings of his predecessors. A systematizer whose name, for now withheld, would become synonymous with the very concept of intellect itself. The young boy's early education remains largely obscured by the mists of antiquity, though we know he lost both parents while still a child, leaving him in the care of a guardian who recognized his exceptional gifts. At 17, he was sent to Athens, the intellectual center of the Greek world, to study at Plato's Academy, a fortuitous meeting of minds that would pair the soaring idealism of the master with the earthbound observations of the student. Aristotle, for that was his name, spent 20 years at the Academy, absorbing Plato's teachings, while simultaneously developing his own distinct approach to understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it. While Plato looked to the eternal forms beyond the material world, Aristotle found truth embedded in the natural objects surrounding him, philosophical divergence captured in Raphael's famous painting, The School of Athens, where Plato points upward to the ideal while Aristotle gestures outward to the real. When Plato died in 347 before Christ, Aristotle departed Athens, perhaps disappointed at not being chosen to lead the academy, or perhaps simply seeking new intellectual horizons. He traveled to Assos in Asia Minor, where he married Pythias, the niece of the ruler, and began his serious biological investigations, cataloging marine life with a precision that would not be matched for centuries. His wanderings eventually led him to Macedon, where King Philip II appointed him tutor to his son, a temperamental 13-year-old, who would one day be known as Alexander the Great. What conversations transpired between the philosopher, who believed in moderation, and the prince who would conquer the known world, we can only imagine yet. The connection between these two towering figures of antiquity would shape the course of civilization itself. When Alexander ascended to the throne and began his legendary conquests, Aristotle returned to Athens and established his own school, the Lyceum. Unlike the Academy with its focus on mathematics and abstract reasoning, the Lyceum emphasized observation and practical knowledge. Here, Aristotle would pace the covered walkways as he lectured, earning his students the name Peripatetics, those who walk about while developing the astonishing breadth of works that would eventually fill the equivalent of nearly 40 modern books. Logic, physics, metaphysics, aesthetics, ethics, rhetoric, psychology, linguistics, economics, politics, natural sciences, no domain of knowledge escaped his systematic inquiry, his drive to categorize and understand. The scope of Aristotle's intellectual achievement staggers the modern mind. He created formal logic, the system of reasoning that would dominate Western thought until the 19th century. His ethical works, particularly the Nicomachean Ethics, proposed that virtue lies in the golden mean between extremes, and that happiness comes not from pleasure or wealth, but from living according to one's essential nature. His Politics examined constitutions of Greek city-states to determine which forms of government best serve the common good, while his Poetics established the foundations of literary criticism and his rhetoric codified the art of persuasion. Yet perhaps his most profound impact came through his natural philosophy, what we would now call science. Unlike many Greek philosophers who speculated from first principles, Aristotle observed. He dissected animals, studied embryonic development in birds' eggs, classified hundreds of species, noted the behaviors of octopi and the reproductive habits of sharks. If some of his conclusions seem quaint to modern scientists' belief that the heart rather than the brain was the seat of intelligence, or that heavy objects fall faster than light, one's way must remember that he worked without telescopes or microscopes, without calculus or chemistry, armed only with his senses and his remarkable mind. The intellectual edifice Aristotle constructed stood largely unchallenged for nearly 2,000 years. His works, preserved by Arabic scholars during Europe's Dark Ages, would form the foundation of university education in the medieval period. Thomas Aquinas would synthesize Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, creating the intellectual framework of the Catholic Church. Even as Renaissance scientists like Galileo began to dismantle aspects of Aristotle's physics, they did so using the logical methods he had developed the student, surpassing the teacher through the very tools the teacher had provided. Yet for all his intellectual glory, Aristotle's final years held sorrow. When Alexander died in 323 before Christ, anti-Macedonian sentiment surged in Athens, and Aristotle, associated with the conqueror, found himself vulnerable to political attacks. Fearing that Athens might sin twice against philosophy, referring to the execution of Socrates decades earlier, he fled to Chalcis on the island of Euboea. There, in exile from his beloved Lyceum, suffering from digestive ailments that had long plagued him, Aristotle died in 322 before Christ at the age of 62, leaving behind a corpus of work that would shape human thought for millennia to come. The man who had catalogued the known world from the movement of the stars to the parts of animals, from the constitutions of city-states to the elements of drama now, took his place in the great silence that awaits all humans, regardless of their intellectual achievements. His physical remains returned to dust, but his ideas proved nearly immortal, transmitted through manuscripts and translations, arguments and interpretations, across cultures and centuries, influencing minds from Baghdad to Bologna, from Constantinople to Cambridge. Even in our modern world, where science has moved beyond many of his specific claims, Aristotle's methodical approach to knowledge, his belief that the world is intelligible to human reason, and his insistence on empirical observation remain foundational to our intellectual enterprise. As you drift toward sleep, consider how this ancient mind continues to shape your own thinking in the categories you use to organize experience, in the ethical principles that guide your choices, in the very logic that structures your thoughts. Perhaps there is comfort in knowing that the questions Aristotle pondered, what constitutes a good life, how societies should be governed, what methods lead to genuine knowledge, remain our questions still, connecting us across the vast expanse of time to this singular intellect who walked the shaded pathways of Athens. In a world of ephemeral trends and fleeting fame, the enduring influence of Aristotle reminds us that some thoughts transcend their moment, speaking to what is most essentially human across the ages. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your thoughts, like those of the great Stagirite, seek harmony between the ideal and the real in the quiet wisdom of your dreams. Against the backdrop of America's counterculture movement, a child of adoption would grow to reshape our technological landscape, leaving an indelible mark on how humanity interacts with machines. His vision would transform cold, calculating computers into extensions of human creativity and connection. This is the story of a man whose pursuit of perfection would inspire devotion and frustration in equal measure. A visionary who saw technology not merely as tools, but as art forms that could elevate the human experience. This is the tale of Steve Jobs. Born in San Francisco in 1955 to unwed parents who gave him up for adoption, young Stephen was welcomed into the modest home of Paul and Clara Jobs. His adoptive father, a mechanic, would unknowingly plant the seeds of craftsmanship in the boy by teaching him that even the parts of a product unseen by others should be made beautiful. This philosophy would eventually become the cornerstone of his revolutionary approach to design. The Silicon Valley of his youth was transforming from orchards to the epicenter of technological innovation, a fitting backdrop for a mind that would one day help orchestrate that very transformation. As a teenager, Jobs displayed the paradoxical blend of rebellion and focus that would characterize his later years. He experimented with psychedelics, traveled to India seeking spiritual enlightenment, and dabbled in various counterculture movements. Yet beneath this seeming aimlessness burned a singular determination to create something meaningful. In his early 20s, alongside his technically brilliant friend Steve Wozniak, he founded Apple Computer in his parents' garage, a humble beginning for what would become one of the most valuable companies in human history. The Macintosh computer, unveiled in 1984, embodied Jobs' philosophy that technology should be both powerful and beautiful. While others in the industry created machines that required users to adapt to their complexity, Jobs insisted on computers that adapted to human intuition. His famous attention to detail extended to aspects others considered irrelevant: the curvature of corners, the spacing of letters, even the design of circuit boards that would never be seen by consumers. This obsession with perfection would simultaneously drive innovation and alienate those who worked alongside him. The trajectory of his rise was interrupted by a stunning fall. Ousted from the very company he had created, Jobs found himself adrift, his vision rejected by those who could not comprehend its full scope. It was perhaps the greatest test of his resilience, a dark night of the soul that would have broken lesser spirits. Yet in this wilderness period, he established new ventures, Next Computer, and purchased Pixar, the animation studio that would revolutionize filmmaking. Even in exile, his mind remained fixed on creating the future rather than lamenting the past. When a struggling Apple eventually purchased NXT in 1997, Jobs returned to his creation like a prodigal son coming home. The company he found was but a shadow of his vision, teetering on bankruptcy and having lost its creative edge. What followed was perhaps the greatest corporate turnaround in business history. Under his renewed leadership, Apple would release a cascade of revolutionary products: the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, each one reshaping entire industries in its wake. These were not merely technological achievements, but expressions of Jobs' belief that technology should elevate the human experience, making the complex simple and the ordinary magical. His famous product presentations became cultural events, showcasing not just his marketing genius, but his understanding that technology should inspire wonder. "One more thing," he would say before unveiling each new creation, his words becoming both catchphrase and promise of innovation. Behind these triumphant moments, however, raged battles with his own demanding nature. Colleagues spoke of his reality distortion field, his ability to demand the impossible until those around him somehow made it possible. Jobs could be mercurial, harsh, and uncompromising, yet those same qualities drove Apple to achieve what more reasonable leaders might have deemed unattainable. In 2003, Jobs received devastating news: a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. The man who had controlled every aspect of his creations now faced the ultimate lack of control. Initially rejecting conventional medical treatment in favor of alternative approaches, he would later regret this decision as the cancer advanced. Yet even as his body failed him, his mind remained fixed on creation. He continued to lead Apple, introducing new products and refining his vision even as his strength ebbed. His 2005 Stanford commencement address revealed a reflective side often hidden behind his public persona. "Your time is limited," he told the graduates, "so don't waste it living someone else's life." These words carried the weight of a man confronting his own mortality while considering his legacy. He spoke of connecting dots looking backward, of loss leading to renewal, and of death as the single best invention of life, for clearing away the old to make way for the new. In his own life, we see these themes played out in dramatic fashion: adoption leading to Silicon Valley, dismissal leading to creative renewal, and illness leading to a focused determination to complete his life's work. As his health deteriorated, Jobs worked to ensure Apple's future beyond his lifetime. He established Apple University to imbue future leaders with his philosophy and meticulously planned a corporate campus that would embody his aesthetic vision in architectural form. In August 2011, too weak to continue, he resigned as CEO. On October 5th of that year, the brilliant flame that had illuminated so much innovation was extinguished. He died at his home, surrounded by family, having transformed multiple industries and changed how humanity interacts with technology. The legacy of Steve Jobs extends far beyond the products he created or the company he built. His true achievement was showing that technology need not be cold and impersonal, but could instead be an extension of human creativity and connection. He understood that the most powerful technology disappears into the background, becoming as natural as turning a page or composing a melody. In merging the humanities with science, art with engineering, Jobs created tools that amplified human potential rather than diminishing it. Perhaps there is wisdom in his contradictions: the adoption that led to belonging, the wilderness years that enabled triumphant return, the harshness that produced beauty, and the awareness of death that intensified his appreciation for life. In a world increasingly mediated by screens and algorithms, Jobs insisted that technology serve humanity rather than the reverse. His vision reminds us that our devices should enhance our humanity, not replace it. As we drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps we might reflect on his insistence that we stay hungry, stay foolish, remaining open to wonder and possibility even as we recognize our limitations. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your own dots connect in patterns yet unimagined. Within the shadows of the 18th century, a mind emerged whose brilliance would illuminate literature, science, philosophy, and art with equal radiance. A polymath whose restless intellect refused the constraints of specialization, embracing instead the full spectrum of human knowledge and experience. His works would inspire generations of thinkers and artists, from Nietzsche to Freud, from Beethoven to Mann. This is the story of a man who contained multitudes, whose life was a testament to the endless capacity of the human spirit for growth and transformation. This is the tale of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Born in 1749 to a prosperous family in Frankfurt, Germany, young Johann entered a world on the cusp of momentous change. The Enlightenment was giving way to Romanticism, and Goethe would come to embody both movements, the rational pursuit of knowledge and the passionate exploration of emotion. His father, a stern imperial counselor, provided him with a comprehensive education, while his mother, with her love of storytelling, nurtured his imagination. These dual influences, structure and creativity, discipline and freedom, would shape his extraordinary intellectual journey. As a young man, Goethe studied law at his father's insistence, first at Leipzig and later at Strasbourg. Yet even as he dutifully pursued his legal studies, his mind wandered to literature, art, and the sciences. At 24, he published his first novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, a work that captured the emotional turbulence of youth with such power that it not only brought him immediate fame throughout Europe, but allegedly inspired a wave of suicides among impressionable young readers. This early success revealed Goethe's uncanny ability to translate human experience into art, to distill complex emotions into words that resonated across cultures and generations. In 1775, at the invitation of the young Duke Karl August, Goethe moved to the small duchy of Weimar, expecting a brief sojourn. Instead, this modest German town would become his home for the remainder of his long life. The Duke appointed him to positions of increasing responsibility: Privy Councillor, Director of the State Theatre, Minister of State, roles that Goethe fulfilled with characteristic thoroughness. Yet public service never dampened his creative fire. In Weimar, Goethe would produce some of his greatest works, while simultaneously managing mines, overseeing road construction, and implementing administrative reforms, a Renaissance man in an age of increasing specialization. His restless intellect refused to acknowledge boundaries between disciplines. While crafting timeless literature, he conducted scientific investigations with equal passion. His theory of colors challenged Newton's established principles of optics. His botanical studies on plant morphology anticipated aspects of evolutionary theory. He collected minerals, studied anatomy, and developed theories on weather patterns. For Goethe, science and art were not separate pursuits, but complementary approaches to understanding the profound mysteries of existence. In 1786, feeling constrained by his duties and seeking creative renewal, Goethe embarked on a clandestine journey to Italy. This self-imposed exile would prove transformative. Immersed in classical art and Mediterranean light, he experienced what he later described as a rebirth. "I can say that only in Rome have I felt what it truly means to be a human being," he wrote. The Italy that Goethe encountered, with its ancient ruins, Renaissance masterpieces, and vibrant culture, released something profound within him, allowing his creative powers to find new expression. Upon his return to Weimar, Goethe entered into a relationship with Christiane Vulpius, a woman of humble origins whom he would eventually marry after 18 years together. This union, scandalous to Weimar society, reflected Goethe's lifelong resistance to convention. Throughout his life, his relationships with women provided inspiration for his work, from his youthful infatuation with Charlotte Buff, who inspired Werther, to his passionate connection with Marianne von Willemer, whose poetry he incorporated into his West Eastern Divan. Even in his 70s, he fell deeply in love with Ulrike von Levetzow, a woman more than 50 years his junior, proving that the capacity for passionate attachment endured even as youth faded. The crowning achievement of his literary career, Faust, occupied Goethe for nearly 6 decades. This epic drama, concerning a restless scholar who makes a pact with the devil in his quest for ultimate knowledge, embodied Goethe's own lifelong struggle between intellect and emotion, between the pursuit of knowledge and the yearning for experience. Two souls, alas, reside within my breast, laments Faust, expressing the internal divisions that Goethe himself navigated throughout his life. Not completed until shortly before his death, Faust stands as both summa and testament of his literary genius, a work that encompasses the breadth of human experience from the celestial to the demonic. As the 19th century dawned, Goethe's fame attracted pilgrims from across Europe to Weimar. Among them was a young Napoleon Bonaparte, who met with Goethe in 1808 and famously declared, "You are a man." The aging writer became something of an oracle, dispensing wisdom to visitors like the American Ralph Waldo Emerson, who described meeting Goethe as visiting the mountains. Despite the reverence accorded him, Goethe maintained his intellectual curiosity and creative output well into old age, publishing new works and revising earlier ones with undiminished vigor. In his final years, Goethe was sustained by his friendship with the composer Carl Friedrich Zelter and the young poet Johann Peter Eckermann, whose recorded conversations with the master provide invaluable insights into Goethe's thought. He outlived many of his contemporaries, including his dear friend Friedrich Schiller and his patron, the Duke of Weimar. He even outlived his only son, August, whose death in 1830 was a grievous blow to the aging writer. Yet Goethe remained remarkably productive, completing Faust Part II at age 82, and working on scientific writings until the end. On March 22, 1832, at the age of 82, Goethe died in his armchair in Weimar, having reportedly uttered the famous last words, "More light." Whether a literal request or a metaphorical plea for greater illumination, these final words encapsulate the quest that defined his extraordinary life, the unceasing pursuit of clarity, understanding, and truth. He was laid to rest beside his friend Schiller in the ducal vault in Weimar, two luminaries of German literature united in death as they had been in life. The legacy of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe transcends national and disciplinary boundaries. His literary works continue to be read, performed, and studied worldwide. His scientific investigations, though sometimes eclipsed by his artistic achievements, reveal a holistic approach to knowledge that challenges our modern compartmentalization of learning. His philosophical insights on human development, captured in his concept of Bildung, the ongoing process of self-cultivation, offer wisdom in an age of instant gratification and specialized expertise. Perhaps what speaks most powerfully to us today is Goethe's refusal to accept limitations, the limitations of age, of discipline, of convention. In a world increasingly defined by specialization and fragmentation, his life reminds us of the integrative power of the human mind, capable of embracing both scientific precision and artistic sensitivity. His enduring message might be found in lines from Faust: "Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it." As we drift towards sleep, perhaps we can draw inspiration from this titan of intellect who never ceased growing, learning, and creating until his final breath. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your own quest for light continue in the realm of dreams and beyond.